let's parse through that, because some of our audience is quite young, so they don't really remember the fall of the Soviet Union, because some of that did happen, but it was happening when Western forces were kind of stealing from the coffers of Russia before Vladimir Putin became president. So could you clarify sort of the timeline of when things did get difficult in the Soviet Union for people that might not know?
Yeah, definitely. So I would say it all kind of started from this period that is typically understood as the era of stagnation, which is the early 80s, the end of the Brezhnev period, when immediately when Gorbachev came to power. They call it the era of stagnation because the Soviet economy wasn't doing as well as it was in years prior. A lot of that has to do with the lowering of the global oil price that the Soviet economy heavily relied on to make money from abroad. But also there were real structural issues in the Soviet Union that needed restructuring, and that's no doubt the case. But there were different people that had different ideas of how to restructure things, and the people that wanted to go down the socialist path basically lost a power struggle. And Gorbachev came to power promising that socialism would be reformed by basically opening up free markets. And when that happened throughout the late 1980s, we started seeing the highest rate of deficits, the most shortages. That's the Soviet Union that the defectors remember. This time period towards the end when everyone was waiting in line for like basic necessities, which is because Gorbachev began this privatization of the economy. He started opening up a market economy, and the corruption that needed to be dealt with in Soviet society, that was a real problem. It needed to be reformed. It basically turned into a situation where these corrupt politicians that weren't dealt with were taking resources from the state economy and selling them on the black markets and making money and becoming the new capitalists. And that's why when people started going to, supermarkets that were run by the state, there were shortages all over the place. That eventually translated into the fall of the Soviet Union, where in the 90s, those people took over and it was just even worse than the early 90s. And the late 80s when when the Soviet Union was going down that path. It was only after Vladimir Putin came to power in the early 2000s that he really put an end to that. And why? Because he took the mechanism of the state, and he actually put the oligarchs that existed in line. He gave them an ultimatum. He said, you either follow the rules that we're going to lay down now, which are not, are entirely in your favor, because we have to make sure that society develops correctly, or hit the road. And a lot of people hit the road, and
or were forced out, like Bill Browder, who was an American anyway, American oligarch.
Yeah, exactly. Who was getting away with tax fraud and like basically all of the rest of the capitalists at that time, because it was just generally accepted. And that's something that under Putin changed. So these capitalists that didn't get with the picture, the state came after them. And now they're like the most anti-Russian government people in the West, shouting from all the way over there. But, what did the average Russian person get from this? It was a beneficial situation. Their living standards have significantly improved since then.
Well, in my view, which was informed by things that I read, through Chomsky and other people like yourself that were actually there observing changes, or in Chomsky's case, he was here, but he was observing changes happening. Vladimir Putin created a middle class. There was no middle class at that time. Would you say that's about right? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, of course, Russia's still a capitalist country with its own problems, but it definitely is a lot more stable, and there's a much bigger middle class than there was in the 1990s.
And John, I wanted to point this out, that a lot of Americans are so uneducated about Russia that they still think it's communist. And so like sometimes in conversations in threads, I will remind people, Russia's communist. They'll say, Russia's capitalist. It's not communist, because they'll be saying, it's communist and it's this and that, but it's not. However, there is what I like that I've seen with Russia is this, and you and I kind of had this talk about this, is where it is in capitalism, there are still programs like childcare, like benefits for people that are having, need parental leave, there's pensions, there's, there's medical care, there's education for people that need it. And, Vladimir Putin even gave, there was a surplus recently, and he gave that by upping the pensions and upping benefits for people. You don't see that in the United States. I mean, what is your view on that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's I would say that's a combination of the fact that they have this Soviet legacy that was left behind, and the fact that and that's tied into the fact that the Communist Party in the Russian Federation is still one of the most powerful political forces in the country. It's the second largest political party in the entire country, second only to United Russia, which is at least informally the party of Vladimir Putin, or the party that openly supports him the most. And on the other hand, it has to do with the fact that, Russia's kind of new to capitalism in a sense. I mean, obviously, it was capitalist before the USSR, but those times were pretty irrelevant by the time the USSR collapsed. And so the stage they're kind of in is not the stage of capitalist development that we see in the West of like monopoly capitalism, of degradation of society. They're kind of still in the initial stages where capitalism is, not what we're seeing in the West. So,
well, you brought up the monopolies, and I think that that's a really key point, because right now in the U.S. we have this concentration of wealth, where 80% of the wealth or more, actually 85%, I think now, is owned by just a handful of people in the U.S. And and when that happens, the workers are exploited extensively, and that's what you're seeing. And unions are being busted, like Amazon and Starbucks. You're seeing examples of how there's so much union busting, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, also here, of course, all over the world, there's a lot to be desired when it comes to unions and union organizing. But one thing that we could say about Russia, and this is something also I mentioned in our other interview on the Revolution Report YouTube channel, is that the way I see Russian society, the way I see the administration that rules over it, it's what I called basically a Bonapartist situation. This is something that Karl Marx wrote about, and it can only take place in very specific historical conditions, usually after some sort of revolutionary change in society. And we saw this with the transition from socialism to capitalism after the fall of the USSR. And even after any sort of revolutionary situation, there's a period of chaos where classes, not one class can get their foot ahead of the other. And eventually, sometimes when this goes on for too long, you get some sort of strongman, or someone related to the state bureaucracy that existed before this revolutionary period, that was not done away with. And they actually come to power in the state apparatus. And although the society is capitalist, it's not traditional in the sense that the capitalists are telling the state what they have to do, because they're supposed to represent their own interests. We have the reverse, the way I see it, in Russia, where the oligarchs, they do exist. There's a capitalist class, but it is actually accountable to the state bureaucracy. Right. Because of that, they can't do whatever they want. And that's why, for example, Russia's military operation in Ukraine, this is something that a lot of Russian oligarchs are not happy about, but there's nothing they can do about it, And that's a much better situation than what we have in the West, I think.